So, after a long wait, the IDW Sonic comics are finally released, and as promised, we're here to talk about them.
And to think that you weren't going to bother reading the comics at first.
Now, I'm already aware that IDW got the rights to make Sonic comics next year, and I don't have much interest in reading them. I have nothing against the company, I just feel like the IDW Sonic comics won't have as much creative freedom as Archie or Fleetway had back in the day. Oh, right, that. Man, I really should have cut that line out of the episode. Well, considering the fact that this was announced right after Archie Sonic got canned, it just felt too soon for me. But then again, it wasn't that fair of me to jump to conclusions considering the fact that it was just announced back then, and all we got was, IDW's making Sonic comics. And that's it. It wouldn't get any more info on it until much later. So in the end, I might have given up on the future of Sonic games, but I'm willing to continue on with the written world of Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, unlike most comics where a new issue comes out monthly, they decide to have the first 4 issues be released weekly before going into the monthly schedule. Makes me wonder if this tactic will come back to bite them in the ass once the monthly sales start declining, but again, way too early to judge at this point.
Unlike Archie Comics, where you could subscribe to the company and get the newest issue in the mail every month, IDW doesn't really do that with their comics. You have to either buy them from their official website, find them on eBay or other online shopping sites, or go to your nearest comic book store. I did manage to read the issues on the internet. I know I shouldn't, but it saved me money and shelf space.
Well, you ain't the only one. I did manage to find a comic book shop where I live, or at least one that was less than an hour away, so I was good to go. Unfortunately, I had my hands tied with final projects and final exams during my final year in college when the comics started to get released. Not to mention the fact that the first 4 issues sold out really quickly that it became impossible for me to get my hands on a physical copy. So I did what everybody else did who couldn't afford them, read them on YouTube. Although I did manage to get my hands on a physical copy of the first issue later on, but I'll most likely wait for a graphic novel that reprints the first 4 issues to be released. To start things off, you might be a bit disappointed that the first issue doesn't go into any backstory or detail on who Sonic is or the world that he lives in. It's just a very brief description of how Sonic's the hero, Robotnik's the enemy, and that's it. Of course, then again, Archie Sonic didn't have a proper introduction when they started making official comics. It has that structure of characters showing up and not much is explained about them because they expect that you automatically know who these characters are. So unless you're familiar with the source material, most newcomers might feel a bit alienated by this as their first introduction to the Blue Hedgehog.
Yeah, it's like, here's Sonic! You should all know him by now! And apparently all the Sonic games are in canon with each other going by the appearances of the Eggman bosses, with the final boss from Forces being the most current one. You want to know what happened prior to the comic? Go play Forces. We'll wait.
Okay, I think that's enough waiting. Now, if there's one thing that the series has, is action. So far, each issue has Sonic and his friends fighting off some badniks, and much like the new continuity in Archie Sonic, the robots are a mix between new and old, rather than just sticking with only one series of robots. Anyway, let's break it down with each issue. The comic starts off after the events of Sonic Forces. Robotnik's gone missing, and his robots are running amok all over Mobius. Yes, I know that's not Sonic's homeworld in this universe, but I'm still calling it Mobius anyway, because it's a more creative name than Planet No Name. So the first issue is about Sonic and Tails fighting off some robots, wondering who's behind all of this, and then Sonic heads out to find some more clues. It has a nice scene for Sonic and Tails to interact outside of fighting, and Tails is written well here, helps out, fights the good fight and all that. Definitely a huge improvement from how he acted in Lost World and in Forces. And when they mention the events from Forces in the comics, it's very vague, or very brief. Robotnik took over, Sonic and his team stopped him, and that's about it. No mentioning of Infinite and his pathetic backstory, no classic Sonic retcon, although there is a very vague reference to the Avatar character. But overall, it's a weird way to start this right after the events of Forces, but at least it's being written by a better writer.
Issue 2 starts with Sonic taking down a giant enemy crab robot. Yeah, massive damage, all that stuff. This is also where Amy comes in. I'm glad they have her doing stuff in this issue, and she is more likeable than a crazy fangirl who wants to go after him. The banter between her and Sonic is like they were old friends, and she is trying to get him to rejoin the Resistance. It's similar to the last issue where they team up to take down a robot invasion. I also like how Amy acts like a competent strategist as well. Imagine if they made a Sonic game similar to XCOM or Fire Emblem, where each Sonic character has to plan and strategize their movements against enemy robots. It worked with that Mario vs. Rabbids game.
Issue 3 marks the debut of Knuckles, and thank God he acts nothing like his game counterpart these days. Yeah, a Knuckles who's more reliable and cares deeply about protecting the Master Emerald. In other words, they took the Archie Sonic version of him and put him in the IDW Sonic universe. And his interactions with Sonic are great. It's nice to see a more humble Knuckles rather than the doofus in most games, and especially that brain-dead moron in Sonic Boom. And this issue does something that Forces couldn't be bothered in doing. Explain why the Wisps are involved. Turns out that during Robotnik's reign of terror, they contacted the aliens for some help, and they happily volunteered to fight with the Resistance. And they also said how Tails went missing during those events, and not that whole Tails has lost it crap. I've heard some people say that line was a translation error in the game, but the bitter and cynical side of me still thinks that Pontek and Graf threw that line in on purpose, just for the sake of trying to be dark and edgy, when there really is no context to support it. Well, aside from all of that, we also have our first introduction to some new baddies, Rough and Tumble, and they are amusing, doing cheesy poses and taglines. And there's even a moment where one of them unleashes their gases to try and stun Knuckles. Yeah, you never see Jeffrey St. John doing any of that. So far, the comics are doing well. Now let's see how issue 4 holds up.
Issue 4 is where Blaze, a new character Tangle, comes in. I'm glad that Blaze made it into the Sonic Forces universe at last. A new character Tangle's pretty cool too. She made a good first impression, and I was amazed how the fans quickly fell in love with her, from professional looking fan art to cosplays. Here's hoping she'll appear in future issues. The action is also very well done, and I love Sonic's goofiness in this issue as well, especially his mad grin when he jumped on the conveyor belt.
Yeah, I'm definitely up for it to see Tangle become a recurring character in this series. And that concludes our coverage of the first 4 issues. So far, I feel like the comics are doing good. Sure, they're featuring more elements from the games, but we still get to see some new locations and expand the game universe by giving some proper explanation on things. This continuity has a lot of catching up to do with trying to establish its background and lore, since IDW stated that they can use anything from the games, but they didn't clarify on what specific games they're allowed to adapt. So far, this is like the MOP comics, set in the same universe and characters, but manages to have enough new material to be its own universe. And after all, the MOP comics are technically considered non-canon to the show. I would have liked to see more detail on the story and background of these characters and worlds, but we all know Sega gets to have the final say on this stuff. It's also surprising that they didn't reveal who the guy is in the chair. Could it be the return of Infinite, Eggman Nega, Ken Penders? Or maybe it's Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. Who knows?
At first, I thought it might be Infinite, but that might be too obvious. So I thought, what if it was Big the Cat? Imagine how big of a twist that would be. Although, how he could fit in that chair is beyond me. They should have asked him to join the Resistance when they had the chance.
And for those asking me if I consider it better than Archie Sonic or a spiritual successor, well, I can't really say at this time. Only a few issues have been released, and it's way too early to start comparing them on whether or not which one is superior. Give it some time to breathe. It's rather unfair taking a comic series that's lasted for over 290 issues and start comparing and contrasting it to a brand new series that so far has released about 5 or so issues. And the drama for this is pretty annoying. Even before the comics started getting released, a lot of people were complaining about 2 things: Ian Flynn and the lack of freedom fighters. Well, we already talked about some of this stuff in a previous episode, but I've seen quite a few people who just outright attack Flynn, trying to expose him, signing worthless petitions to get him fired, etc., etc. It's like the phase, don't like it, just ignore it, is a foreign language to those guys. But anyway, I'm liking IDW Sonic so far, but I'm still a bit skeptical if this will become another victim to the IDW curse of short-lived video game comics.
The comic's not too bad. I like how it feels like an expanded universe story that continues on from Sonic Forces, kinda like how some Star Wars comics would continue on from the movies. I really like how the robots used were from Sonic Heroes instead of those generic robots seen in the game. Why couldn't they go with those designs? Also, Sonic does feel better written and more likeable than the one-liner spouting version in the Sonic Forces game, who feels a bit one-dimensional and flat. Even his expressions are great, especially in issue 4. Also, the plot of Sonic going from town to town defending them from intruders does give that Attack on Titan feel to it. I like the banter between Sonic and his friends as well, especially when he and Knuckles liberate the Wisps, which explain why they still appear after Sonic Colors.
Now, of course, this won't be the last time we'll cover IDW Sonic on this show. In fact, I might have more episodes finished before Roger gets to finally talk about these comics. Well, that's all we've got to say for this episode. Good night, everybody.
Cheerio!